My wife forgot our anniversary, so I didn't pick her up at the airport. Am I the asshole for not forgiving her despite her later apology? My wife forgot our anniversary, so I decided not to pick her up at the airport. I am a 23-year-old male married to Sarah, 25. We've been together for 5 years, and I'm reaching a breaking point. Let me set the stage. It's our 5th wedding anniversary. You'd think that after 5 years of marriage, some recognition of the milestone would be expected, right? I had been dropping hints for weeks, saying things like, I can't believe we've been married for 5 years, or, do you think we'll do anything special for our anniversary this year? She responded distractedly, as I expected given her hectic schedule. Then the day arrived, and everything went as usual. She didn't say anything. There were no flowers, no meal, and no mention of our anniversary. I mean, I had gone all out every year before, organizing surprise dinners, writing meaningful messages, and sending thoughtful gifts. But over the past few years, it seemed like I was the only one making an attempt. So I brought it up. I said something like, hey, I suppose we aren't celebrating today. She just laughed it off, saying, oh, we'll do something later. Don't worry. But later never arrived. The day went without her realizing it. I felt hurt and irritated. I've put so much into this marriage, and now here I am, feeling forgotten on our anniversary. Then things began to spiral. She had a business trip arranged for the same week, departing on the 14th and returning the following evening. She asked me to bring her up from the airport, as usual. At first, I hesitated. I had been giving passive-aggressive indications about my feelings, but she didn't appear to notice. Instead, she kept making jokes about how weary she was from the trip and how excited she was to be home, without mentioning the anniversary. It was all about work, and everything seemed okay. Frustration built up. I had been doing all the emotional work, making every special occasion memorable, while she was constantly distracted or preoccupied. That night, after lying awake for several hours, I made a decision. I was not going to pick her up at the airport. I wasn't about to reward her contempt for me. Maybe if I stopped being so accommodating, she'd realize how much she took me for granted. I did not text her, call her, or do anything. When she gave me the normal message with her flight information, time, gate, and ETA, I didn't answer. I did not even acknowledge it. It felt empowering to simply not care, even if only for a moment. I spent the day doing my own thing, treating myself as I deserved, with no regard for Sarah's flight or her return. Around 8 p.m., I began receiving texts from her one after the other. She started phoning over and over. I simply ignored it. A part of me felt bad, but the majority of me felt strangely satisfied. Sarah was stranded at the airport with no one to pick her up, and I wasn't going to be the dutiful husband anymore. She could figure things out. Finally, about an hour later, after ignoring her calls for what seemed like an eternity, I texted her. Oh, sorry. I completely forgot you needed a ride. This happens from time to time. I confess it was a touch petty, and I'm not proud of it. But, after 5 years of always putting her needs first, I finally broke. The remarks were almost too sweet, full of irony. I knew it would enrage her, and that's exactly what occurred. The next text I received was a series of heated rants, calling me selfish and reckless. She went on about how I was overreacting and being childish. I didn't care. The following several hours were a haze. She eventually found her way home, and as she came through the door, there was a chill in the air. She scarcely acknowledged me. She was still angry and sulking, and I didn't care anymore. I went to bed early that night and left her to her thoughts. The following day was no better. Sarah did not even apologize. She made the same old excuse about work being stressful, claiming she had just lost track of things. But I wouldn't have it. I wasn't going to let her brush everything under the rug anymore. I wanted her to admit she had messed up. I wanted her to understand what she'd done. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the sense that nothing would change. So I let her be angry. And me? I felt an odd combination of remorse and delight. I have no idea where this will lead, but I know I can't go back to the way things were. Something has to give. Update number 1. After I texted Sarah about forgetting to take her up, I didn't hear from her for a while. But, oh, when I did, it was not pretty. She started texting and calling repeatedly. I ignored each one. Part of me wanted to just let her stew, but I kept my phone on silent and hours passed. I wasn't going to rush to pick up the pieces because she was the one who had ignored me for so long. It wasn't until after 10 p.m. I eventually surrendered and checked my phone. I had missed perhaps 15 calls and at least 20 texts. Most of them consisted of her calling me petty, reckless, and juvenile. She was infuriated. The most memorable text was one that read, "You really had to leave me stranded. Is this how you treat me after all I've done for you?" I wasn't going to fall into that guilt trip. Instead, I said quietly, "Maybe now you know what it feels like to be forgotten." I didn't say anything else. I knew any additional explanation would be lost on her. Sarah attempted to defend herself as best she could. Her response was classic. "I apologize, okay. But I've been occupied with work. I did not mean to forget the anniversary. You know how hectic things have been recently." It was the usual excuse she had always used. Job stress. But this time, it wasn't going to work. I did not respond right away. I just let the silence linger between us. After a while, she got the hint. It wasn't until the next morning that I realized how deeply she'd been affected by the entire affair. Sarah waited at the airport for more than 3 hours. Apparently, she tried to phone me every half hour throughout that time. She couldn't catch a cab soon away because she didn't want to spend money on it. She eventually gave up and hired a cab, but by the time she arrived home, it was already past midnight. When she came through the door, I didn't welcome her or make small conversation. She did not even look at me. She simply went past me, dropping her suitcase on the floor. It was obvious that she was still irritated. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. She tried to talk, but it was more of a monologue about how unfair I was. "I worked hard, and this is how you treated me?" she inquired, her voice filled with frustration. But the excuses were no longer effective for me. I wasn't interested in hearing about how difficult her job was when I felt like I'd been carrying this relationship alone for months. The first night back was horrible. We did not converse much. The only time she looked at me was while I was preparing for bed. I could feel her stare at me, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I was not going to make the first move. The next day, Sarah tried to make things right by texting me and stating, "I've been working so hard lately, it simply slipped my mind." You know how it goes. Same old narrative, same lame excuse. At this point, it was clear she didn't get it. We scarcely communicated for the following 2 days. Every time we did it, she seemed to be walking on eggshells. She was passive-aggressive, and I was not about to back down either. I had made my point, and I was not going to let her convince me that everything was all right just because she offered a few meaningless apologies. It didn't help that her father became involved. He called to ask why Sarah had to take a cab home. He was concerned, of course, but it seemed like he was trying to guilt-trip me. "I can't believe you left her there," he said. "She's been working so hard, and you just let her figure it out on her own." I had no idea how to answer, so I didn't. I let the call finish and walked away. Later that evening, Sarah made an effort to apologize, but it was not real. It felt forced, as if she was saying sorry simply to relieve the tension. "I guess I could have done better, but you didn't have to leave me stranded," she replied. There was no true accountability, no understanding of why I was furious in the first place, only another deflection. I wasn't going to accept a half-hearted apology. I told her, "I'll get past this if you can acknowledge how I feel and start being more considerate. It's not only about the anniversary. It's about how you treat me overall." How did she respond? She accused me of overreacting. She claimed I was overreacting to the situation, but I refused to back down. After a few more days of stillness and tension, I decided to establish some boundaries. I wanted space to focus on myself, so I resumed my own activities. It was a comfort not to have to continuously attend to her moods. Sarah wasn't delighted with this, but she made one more effort to make things right. She made a dinner reservation for the two of us, stating it was to compensate for something. I wasn't sure if she truly believed it would heal things or if it was a last-ditch effort to escape true responsibilities. Regardless, I wasn't sure if it was enough. I was still waiting to see if she was truly going to change. Is this a serious attempt, or just another temporary fix that will come apart in a few weeks? Update number 2. Following the airport incident, Sarah determined to attempt to set things right. She made a dinner reservation at a restaurant, claiming it was to make amends for everything that had occurred. I won't lie, part of me was cautiously optimistic. Maybe this was the moment she realized how much she had hurt me and decided to make an effort. But, as usual, this was not the case. Sarah texted me at midday on the day of the dinner to inform me that the reservation had been made for 7 p.m. I didn't sense any enthusiasm. I was simply going through the motions. Perhaps it was the fact that this wasn't our first attempt to settle things, or it was the nagging feeling in my gut that this supper would make no difference. Still, I got ready and decided to give it a shot. At least for one night, everything might be different. We got at the restaurant, and to my surprise, it wasn't as nice and private as I had imagined. Instead, it was a basic chain restaurant, The kind you go to for casual evenings when you don't want to put in too much effort. It wasn't even a place I enjoyed. I'd previously stated that I didn't like such types of places, but Sarah had chosen them regardless. I tried not to let it affect me, but it was difficult to ignore the lack of effort. It felt like she had chosen the easiest option, as if she couldn't be bothered to think about what I would want. The conversation began awkwardly. Sarah immediately began discussing how hard her job had been, going on and on about deadlines, meetings, and the amount of strain she was under. She didn't even recognize that she had missed our anniversary or left me stranded in the airport. Instead, she simply kept chatting about work. She said something about doing her best and being stressed out, but I couldn't help but think she was entirely missing the point. She had not apologized for the anniversary. She had not apologized for making me feel totally invisible. The more she discussed work, the more frustrated I felt. It wasn't simply that she was disregarding the larger issue. She didn't appear to comprehend how deeply her actions had hurt me. And it struck me harder than ever. In that moment, I recognized that this was not an isolated incident. This was a pattern. We were sitting there trying to have a great supper, but all I could think about was how disconnected she was from what was truly important. She didn't seem to get why I was wounded. It wasn't only about the anniversary. It was not only about the airport. It was about all the tiny things she had overlooked over the years, like the birthday surprises I arranged alone. She was too busy during the holidays, so we spent them apart. Our small conversation didn't last long, and things began to unravel. We had a minor quarrel about the food, but as often it escalated into something more. She became defensive, arguing that I was being very picky and ungrateful. I attempted to clarify that it was not about the meal or the restaurant, but about everything else. That's when everything started to spill out. I told her how I felt ignored, and how she never seemed to put any effort into our relationship. I mentioned the anniversaries, birthdays, and quiet nights where I felt like a supporting figure in her life. Sarah, however, deflected rather than accepting responsibility. She began talking about how nobody's perfect, and how I should simply accept what I had. And there it was, the excuse I'd grown tired of hearing. Nobody's perfect. It was the mantra she usually said when things got tough, and this time was no exception. When the waiter came by to see if we needed anything else, I simply stared at Sarah. Her countenance was blank, and it was evident she was no longer listening. She made a token effort, offering me a small box of chocolates with a half-hearted smile. "Here," she answered. "This is for you." Sorry for everything. It was a lovely gesture, I suppose, but it felt insincere, a last-ditch effort to make things right without actually addressing the larger issues between us. I did not even want the chocolates. I was past the point of making little gestures. I needed something authentic. The remainder of the dinner was quiet, unpleasant, and full of meaningless platitudes. We scarcely chatted on the way home. I felt the strain in the car. Sarah was still unhappy, but I couldn't tell if she was upset with me for calling her out or with herself for not understanding why I was upset in the first place. It did not matter. Regardless, the silence was deafening. When we returned home, I couldn't shake the impression that nothing had changed. I thought that this time she'd understand, that it wasn't about the little things, but about the broader picture. But my hopes were dashed when I looked at her and realized she still didn't see it. Sarah began completing minor household chores over the next 3 days. She washed the dishes, helped with the laundry, and cleaned up. At first, I assumed this was a sign that she was attempting to change. However, it felt more like damage control than anything else. She wasn't doing these things because she truly wanted to. She was doing them because she knew I was furious and wanted to avoid a confrontation. I noticed myself emotionally distancing more and more. I couldn't help it. I did not want to keep being disappointed. I didn't want to keep waiting for her to change when it appeared she wasn't trying. I didn't want to fix someone who refused to meet me halfway. A friend of mine advised I provide Sarah an ultimatum. "Either she changes, or you walk away," he replied. It seems harsh, but perhaps it was the wake-up call she needed. I couldn't keep on like this, always wondering if she was going to make a genuine effort. Sarah's excuses piled up over time, work stress, deadlines, they were always her explanations for everything. I was beginning to notice a larger problem. Sarah didn't seem to realize the developing emotional distance between us. She assumed that performing the bare minimum would suffice, but I realized that wasn't the case anymore. I began to ponder about our future together. Was this relationship salvageable? I had no idea anymore. Update 3. After weeks of dealing with the same cycle, empty apologies, half-hearted attempts at change, and more excuses, I had reached my breaking point. I could not go on like this any longer. I had tried to be patient and give her opportunities to step up, but it was evident that Sarah didn't grasp it. So I decided to sit down with her and have the chat we should have had months ago. It was not easy. I'd been putting it off, hoping she'd figure it out on her own, but that wasn't happening. When she returned home from work one evening, I informed her that we needed to discuss. There was no way around this one. We sat in the living room, and I could immediately feel the tension rising. I didn't want to yell, but I couldn't hide my feelings any longer. I began by telling Sarah, I can't do this anymore. This relationship has been one-sided for far too long. You've disregarded me, forgotten critical events, and never accepted responsibility for any of it. She only glanced at me, bewildered. What are you talking about? She asked. I've been working so hard, and you're acting like I'm doing nothing. I took a deep breath and tried to remain cool. It is not about your work, Sarah. It's about how you treated me. The anniversary. The airport incident. I've tried to make this relationship work for both of us, but you haven't even attempted to meet me halfway. Sarah instantly went on the defensive, as she usually does. You're blowing things out of proportion, she continued, her voice rising. You're acting like I forgot your anniversary on purpose. I didn't mean to forget, okay? I've been stressed out with work. Sarah responded with defiance. I was not buying it. It isn't only the anniversary, Sarah. It is everything. It's every time you make me feel unimportant. Every birthday and holiday passes, and I'm the only one who makes an attempt. Sarah's face stiffened. I am not perfect, okay? Nobody is perfect. Maybe you're just too demanding. I do what I can. She placed the responsibility back on me. Perhaps you expect too much of me. Her statement made me even enraged. I am not looking for perfection, Sarah. I am asking for basic consideration. I am seeking for respect. I'm asking you to care about our relationship in the same way that I do. But you don't, and that's what really hurts. The room fell silent for a minute. I could see Sarah wasn't expecting this type of discourse. She squirmed uneasily in her seat, obviously unsure how to answer. I guess I could have done better, she said, but it was clear she didn't truly believe it. She didn't really accept responsibility for anything. She wasn't even apologetic. She was simply stating what she needed to say. I'm not interested in hearing you say you could have done better, I stated calmly. I need more than that. I need to know you understand it. I need to know you understand how much your negligence has harmed me, and I need you to demonstrate that you are prepared to make an attempt. Sarah avoided staring at me. I could tell she was uncomfortable, but I was not done. I had one final point to make. How would you feel if the roles were reversed, Sarah? How would you feel if I forgot about our anniversary and left you at the airport? For the first time in the conversation, she was silent. Her mouth opened, but no words emerged. I could see the wheels moving in her thoughts, and for a brief time it appeared that the truth had finally been accepted. She didn't say anything for quite some time, and I let the stillness hang in the air. Finally, Sarah broke the pause with a low, I'm not sure. I suppose I'd be pissed. I nodded. Exactly. That is how I feel. That is how I have felt for a long time. I proposed something simple. Couples activities such as frequent date nights or simply spending time together to restore the connection we once had. I wanted to see if she was truly willing to put up the effort to alter things. We can try it out, but it will require work from both of us. I can't keep carrying this relationship by myself, I admitted. Sarah stared at me and hesitated for a second. Okay, I'll try, she answered, but her tone was flat, as if she was simply repeating what she thought I wanted to hear. I'm not sure whether date nights will solve anything, but I'll try. That was the lackluster response I expected. It felt more like a responsibility than a commitment. I knew I had to wait a few weeks to see whether anything would change. I couldn't simply accept her word for it. The conversation concluded on a tense note. Sarah did not appear convinced, and neither did I. We went to bed without saying anything more, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I kept wondering if Sarah's statements were sincere or if she was just saying anything to get me off her back. I chose to give it time, but I knew I couldn't wait forever. I had already invested so much in this relationship, and I wasn't sure how much more I could offer if nothing changed. I couldn't let myself become trapped in a cycle of disappointment and broken promises. So now I'm simply waiting, to see if Sarah will make an attempt or if she'll revert to her old habits. I'm not sure what will happen, but I do know one thing. I'm not going to stick around for another false promise. Update 4. After that serious chat, things appeared to take a turn. For a time. Sarah tried harder. She actually organized a small date night for us, which included dinner at a local restaurant we both enjoyed. Nothing extravagant, but it did feel like an effort. She also began to assist around the house more, cleaning dishes without being asked, bringing out the garbage, and picking up groceries. Things appeared to be improving for about a week. I even began to wonder whether she was finally getting it. Maybe I was wrong about her. But during the second week, things began to return to normal. Sarah cancelled a planned outing, claiming that work had piled up and she couldn't get away. Again, work stress was her go-to excuse. I tried to be understanding, but it was difficult not to perceive it as yet another meaningless excuse. I was frustrated. I had hoped that her efforts in the first week were meaningful, but they suddenly felt like a temporary fix. Something she did only to keep me quiet. The saddest thing was when Sarah forgot another milestone. She didn't recall the day we first met. It wasn't something big, just a minor detail that mattered to me. I mentioned it lightly, but she just shrugged it off as if it were no great deal. In that instant, I knew she was no longer trying to keep track of these things. She didn't care about the small things that used to matter to both of us. It was only me, attempting to hang on to whatever spark we had left, while she appeared to be losing interest. I began doubting everything. Did Sarah genuinely care about our marriage, or did she simply assume that I would always be there? She didn't appear to realize how much effort I was putting in, which hurt more than I'd want to admit. I wasn't sure if she still respected me or just took me for granted. One day, while cleaning up the living room, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. I found Sarah's calendar stashed beneath some papers on her desk. I don't typically rummage through her belongings, but something told me to look. I noticed the date of our anniversary marked on the calendar. But here's the thing, she still forgot it. It was as if she had prepared for it, made a note of it, but then forgot about it when it finally arrived. I was quite frustrated. Later that night, I confronted her, wondering why she had marked our anniversary yet still forgot about it. She made some poor excuse about forgetting to check her calendar that week. That is what she said, as if it were an innocent mistake. It was not a mistake. It was plain negligence. When I looked at the calendar more thoroughly, I realized what had actually been prioritized. There were work obligations, sporting events, and weekend vacations with pals, but almost nothing about us. Our relationship seemed to have slipped under her notice. I had understood that work was always her top priority, but seeing it set out like that stung me harder than intended. I had tried so hard to keep things going between us, but it seemed like she couldn't be bothered. The final straw arrived a few days later. I overheard Sarah on the phone with a friend, discussing a weekend trip they were arranging for a sporting event. She was ecstatic about it, discussing the trip specifics as if it were the greatest thing ever. I felt terrible to my stomach. This was something she had not revealed to me. She had time for a weekend excursion with her pals, but she couldn't remember even the smallest details about me. I tried to dismiss it at first, but the more I considered it, the more betrayed I felt. It wasn't simply that she prioritized her hobbies, she never thought about how I'd feel. She had plenty of time and energy for everything else, but when it came to us, I felt like an afterthought. So I stopped engaging. I stopped making an attempt. I stopped texting her throughout the day and trying to make small chat when she arrived home. I felt if she didn't notice the distance between us, she probably never would. I needed her to see what was going on. I needed her to feel how I was feeling. Eventually, our pals noticed. They were initially all on Sarah's side, claiming that I was overreacting. But eventually, they noticed it as well. Several friends contacted me, stating they understood my unhappiness and even confessed Sarah had been selfish. They told me I deserved better, and I understood I wasn't alone in seeing the reality. But nothing changed. The final blow came when Sarah cancelled our scheduled dinner date to attend a last-minute gathering with her pals. She didn't even tell me in person. She sent me an apology, stating she couldn't refuse the invitation. That was it. That was when I understood I needed to make a decision. This was something I couldn't keep putting off. Sarah wouldn't change unless I forced her to. I could wait for her to figure it out, but at what cost? The longer I stayed, the more I felt like I had lost myself. I needed to stop waiting for a relationship that was unsatisfactory. Now I'm at a crossroads. I'm not sure if I have the strength to walk away, but I can't keep continuing like this. The emotional barrier has grown so far that I'm not sure how to bridge it anymore. Something needs to give. It's time for me to make a difficult decision about my marriage, one that will either force her to wake up or allow me the space I require to move on. Update 5. After everything that had happened, I felt it was time to take a step back and consider what I really wanted. I needed to decide if I wanted to keep trying in this relationship or if it was time to walk away for forever. So I chose to spend the entire weekend alone. I did not respond to Sarah's SMS or calls. I didn't even leave the house often. I needed room to think, and this time I wasn't going to allow my emotions influence my decision. During that weekend, I finally realized the reality. I had been settling for less than I deserved for quite some time. I recognized how emotionally spent I had gotten by clinging to something that no longer existed. The small things I did for Sarah, the gestures, the effort, all seemed to go unappreciated. She wasn't making an effort to make me feel respected. She was not even trying. And the worst part, Sarah didn't seem to notice anything wrong. She simply went about her normal routine, figuring everything was great. That understanding ached. I spent the entire weekend reflecting on how much I gave to this relationship and how little I received in return. I was no longer upset about the anniversary or the airport event. I was concerned about the big picture. Sarah had never really cared about putting me first. She had never seen me as a priority. When I came out of my weekend of reflection, I realized I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I was emotionally weary, and if I stayed in this relationship, I would only continue to be harmed. So I arranged one last conversation with Sarah. This was it. I was going to lay it all out and set clear boundaries for what I needed if this relationship was going to survive. I decided to wait until the following weekend to have the chat. Sarah was going to be home, and I knew it was our last chance to actually talk. I was prepared to be direct, to tell her everything I had been keeping hidden for so long. When the time arrived, I sat with Sarah in the living room. She could see something was wrong, but I don't think she expected what happened. I began by telling her that I couldn't continue in a relationship in which I felt underappreciated. I've tried to connect with you, I explained, but nothing has changed. You're always too busy, and I'm constantly making excuses for you. I can't do it anymore. Sarah appeared shocked. She couldn't believe what I was saying. She continued asking, "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" I didn't realize things were so horrible. It was as if she was taken aback by anything I said, but I found it difficult to feel sorry for her. How could she not have realized it? How could she not notice the impact her negligence was having on me? She instantly transferred the blame back onto me, saying, "You should have told me how you felt." I didn't realize things were this horrible. I thought everything was fine, she explained. She made it appear as if it was my fault for not being more outspoken about how miserable I was. That's when I realized she was completely out of touch with the state of our relationship. "I've tried, Sarah," I answered, trying to remain cool. "I've tried to connect with you multiple times, but you never listen. You do not take my problems seriously, and I have been left feeling alone. I can't continue doing this." Sarah did not take it well. She asked me for another opportunity. "I will change, I swear. I will put forth more effort. I will prioritize you. Please don't leave me." Her voice was imploring now, and her eyes were filled with desperation. For a brief moment, I considered backing down, but I knew I couldn't just let her keep making bogus promises. She had been doing so for years. "I'm willing to give it one last try," I told you. "But this time, things have to be different. I need you to actually show me that you can change. No more excuses. No more empty apologies." Sarah agreed, but I was not convinced. Her words were only that, words. Action spoke louder, and I wanted to see if she would follow through on anything she said. We discussed specific things she could do to make time for us, organize more thoughtful dates, and be present while we were together. It was a modest list, but it was the beginning. The following few days saw a variety of tiny but obvious changes. Sarah began planning dates again. They weren't lavish, but they were thoughtful, and she was obviously trying. She began to be more present at home, taking the time to talk to me rather than disappearing into her phone or watching TV. It felt like a start in the right direction, but a part of me didn't believe it would endure. Several days later, Sarah surprised me with a handwritten note. She apologized for everything, realized how much I had been carrying in the relationship, and stated her commitment to making significant changes. I was shocked. This was the first time she had truly accepted responsibility for her acts, and it meant a lot to me. It was a step forward, but I was still unsure whether it would be sufficient. I began to sense a glimmer of hope, but I maintained my hard boundaries. I wasn't going to let myself slip into the same habits. I needed to see actual, long-lasting progress. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful that things would improve. But I wasn't going to base my happiness only on Sarah. That was how much I had learnt. So, for now, I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know I can control my own happiness. Whatever happens to her, if things go better, that's terrific. But if they don't, I will be prepared to walk away. The decision is now in my hands. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, Please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.